Okay, good evening, everyone. Very nice to see all of you online. Thank you for coming out tonight, and really lovely to be with all of you here at the Zendo. Really enjoying our quiet sitting together, as well as our bowing and chanting with the fusatsu ceremony. So thank you to our Ino for the voice, and our Doan for the bells, and our Tech Jisha for the tech. So this is our monthly fusatsu atonement ceremony, and I think everyone in the Zendo has done this before, but I'm not sure that everyone online has done. So I think that Theo is shaking his head, and maybe a couple others online haven't done fusatsu before. I'm not going to do much of an explanation, except to say that our atonement ceremony starts out, as you could tell, with a verse of atonement, where we recognize that we are not separate from all the evil karma that has ever been committed, meaning that all of the actions that have caused suffering, we are a part of that. We are connected to that throughout space and time. And then having acknowledged that, the second part of the ceremony is one in which we also acknowledge that we are not separate from all the manifestations of the enlightened mind, of Buddha. And then the next part is, having acknowledged our connection to Buddha mind, we chant the vows of the Bodhisattva to save all sentient beings, to cut off all delusions, to master all dharmas, and to attain the Buddha way. And so now, at this point, normally the kaishi, the officiant, gives a talk on the precepts. But I felt like doing something a little bit differently tonight, and not giving you a little less of my take on the precepts, and offer the take of the great Japanese poet and Zen priest Ryōkan, who lived in the late 18th through the early 19th century. So I'm going to share with you two texts that Ryōkan wrote. One is on the precepts, and the other, I think, is a poem of atonement. That's how I read it anyway. So the first piece is starts out with a line: here is what not to do. Here is what you should refrain from doing. And then he gives a long list of things that you should refrain from doing. Now, it might sound like he's kind of a scold. You might find him bossy, like, who's this guy to be telling me all of these things that I shouldn't be doing? But I think what's helpful, first of all, is to remember that this text was entitled My Precepts. And so I think that, in fact, Ryōkan is talking to himself. He has come up with a set of precepts for himself. And I don't know, have you ever done that? What would it be like if you were to do that? And what would that list look like? So you can see, you might find that some of his precepts are, you nod your head and think, yeah, sure, that makes sense. Others you might think, that sounds problematic to me. I'm not so convinced. But those are the interesting ones to look at, I think, because the things that we balk at may actually have more to give us than the other ones, which seem obvious on the face of it. Okay, so this is Ryōkan, My Precepts. Take care not to talk too much, talk too fast, talk without being asked to, talk gratuitously, talk with your hands. I really like that one. Talk about worldly affairs. How about that? Talk back rudely, argue, smile condescendingly at others' words, use elegant expressions, boast, avoid speaking directly, speak with a knowing air, jump from topic to topic, use fancy words, speak of past events that cannot be changed, speak like a pedant, avoid direct questions, speak ill of others, speak grandly of enlightenment, carry on while drunk, speak in an obnoxious manner, yell at children, make up fantastic stories, speak while angry, name drop, ignore the people to whom you're speaking, speak sanctimoniously of gods and Buddhas, use sugary speech, use flattering speech, speak of things of which you have no knowledge, monopolize the conversation, talk about others behind their backs, speak with conceit, badmouth others, chant prayers ostentatiously, complain about the amount of alms, give long-winded sermons, speak affectedly like an artist, speak affectedly like a tea master. There you go. So the first thing that's interesting is that all of these are about speech. The 10 grave bodhisattva precepts that we follow here at Village Zendo and in Soto Zen, they are precepts about physical action, about speech, and about thought. Right? We said that in the verse of repentance. Body, mouth, and thought. But actually, the most of them are about speech. 4 out of the 10 are about speech. Don't lie. Don't speak about others' errors and faults. Don't put others down and elevate yourself, which might not be a speech act, but it often is. And don't speak ill of the 3 treasures. So 4 out of the 10 are about speech. It's so important. And for Ryōkan, it's all important. All of his precepts are about speech. How interesting. I don't know why. Maybe because he was a writer and language was important to him and communication was obviously important to him. But something for us to look at, our speech, our communication, and ultimately our expression. So when I think about the precepts, the koan, the one koan that I think captures the precepts better than any other is Yunmen's appropriate statement. A monk asked Yunmen, what are the teachings of, what are the words of all the teachers? And Yunmen says, an appropriate statement. What are the teachings of, the teachings of all the teachers? An appropriate statement, says Yunmen. So I think Ryōkan is concerned about how to make an appropriate statement. That is a statement that is not harmful, and a statement that does good and does good for others. But actually, I think Yunmen answered that way because someone asked him a question, and so he gave him an answer, an appropriate statement. But he could have answered many different ways. He could have answered with a physical action. He could have answered with a thought. So it's really saying that the teachings of all the teachers and all of the precepts really can be boiled down to an appropriate expression. So the second piece of Ryōkan's that I wanted to share with you tonight is a poem. And I think it's a poem about atonement. It's called Poem Composed Following a Terrible Earthquake. Day after day after day, at noon and midnight, the cold was piercing. The sky was thick with black clouds that blocked out the sun. Fierce winds howled, snow swirled violently. Wild waves stormed heaven, buffeting monster fish. Walls trembled and shook, people shrieked in terror. Looking back at the past 40 years, I now see that things were racing out of control. People had grown lax and indifferent, forming factions and fighting among themselves. They forgot about obligations and duty, ignored notions of loyalty and justice, and only thought of themselves. Full of self-conceit, they cheated each other, creating an endless, filthy mess. The world was rife with madness. No one shared my concern. Things got worse until the final disaster struck. Few were aware that the world was star-crossed and dreadfully out of kilter. If you really want to understand this tragedy, look deep inside rather than helplessly bemoan your cruel fate. So, we might think about this in terms of the disasters in our own life, in our own times. I think it's an atonement poem because he's talking about the causes that give rise to tragedy and disaster and suffering. Just as we say in our verse of atonement, all evil karma ever committed by me since of old. So all evil karma means all of the actions that have given rise to suffering. And that's what Ryōkan is talking about here. But he's saying this suffering did not just emerge from one day to the next. It was building and accumulating over a long period of time, almost imperceptibly. Does that ring a bell for you? It's also about atonement because he says, don't just helplessly bemoan your cruel fate, but instead look deep inside if you really want to understand this tragedy. And I think that what he's saying there is also what our verse of atonement is saying. All this evil karma ever committed was committed by me on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thought. I am not separate from all of that karma, the root of all of the suffering. I'm not separate from that. If we really look deep inside, we can't find any actual separation. How do you feel that? Sometimes we don't even realize it in our minds, but we might feel it in our body. We might feel it in our energy. Something is off here. Where are we actually separate? If you really scrape below the surface, is there any point where we are separate? So if we are not actually separate, it means that we are connected to all of it, and it means that we are responsible for all of it. And so our atonement is a ceremony of acknowledgement and taking responsibility for all evil karma and our part in that evil karma. And there's a flip side to this too, because if in fact we are responsible for all of this, it means that our actions and our speech and our thoughts have an impact. They make a difference. And therefore, if our actions and speech and thought are not directed to doing harm, but are directed towards doing good or doing good for others, then that will be their karmic effect. At least we can direct our intentions in that way, which is what this atonement ceremony is also about, directing our intentions. It doesn't just depend on our intentions, it depends on everything else. And yet, our actions, speech, and thought do have an impact, have an influence. So there's a difference between sort of helplessly complaining about fate and taking responsibility for fate. And you can feel that difference in your body. You can feel it in your heart, rather than an attitude of helplessness, an attitude of responsibility. It's completely different. And so our fusatsu is about taking that responsibility and directing our attentions and addressing the disaster in our midst. So I think I'll stop there. I want to acknowledge and thank our ancestor Ryōkan, and let's do our precepts work. Let's do our atonement work, and we'll finally wrap up with chanting, invoking the three treasures. We are not separate from Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Thank you.